So the next step in making Pong is we can actually now set up our scene. As you can see, here's an example of what our scene in the end will somewhat look like. We got walls around the borders, we have a net in the middle, ball in the middle, and paddles on each side. First things is we need to deal with our camera sizing. So right now, if you look under the Game tab, at the top here, it is set to free aspect. And what that means is the camera is going to size and change and move however big my game scene is. So as you can see, I have a super widescreen game view here, and my camera with these white lines denotes the size of the camera. But I don't want that. I want to have a more constrained sizing. So what I'm going to do is go back to the original game mode back with Pong, which is a 4:3 aspect ratio. And if you click this free aspect ratio, you can see there's all sorts of 4:3, 3:2, 16:9 for our widescreen, or 16:10 for a little bit taller widescreen. But I'm going to go to the old screen size of standalone, which is 1024 by 768. So when I select that, you'll see the camera size changes, or camera constraints, but you'll notice as I'm sizing up my game scene, nothing in my camera moves. And then in fact, there's actually these black bars, which is what I want. So once we get that set up, now we can go over to our assets folder here, and I can drag out, starting off, a wall. And I'm going to drag it out here to the edge of the wall here like this. Now you'll notice it is a little small. So there's a couple ways we can do this. The first tool up here on the right is this kind of our sprite tool, our universal sprite tool, where I can now hover over it and I can grab one of the corners and resize it. I can kind of go into the middle and drag it around, depending on how skinny it is and how easy it is to grab it. But I basically want to move this around to get it to an edge that kind of looks something like this. Okay. Now with the wall selected, I can also do Command D to duplicate and center my thing over here to look like this, grab it onto the other side. Then I can Command D duplicate this wall one more time, and you might think, oh, let's just resize it here for the wall. But now look, as I use the scroll wheel to zoom in, you'll see I get a fuzzy edge. And that's because with that fuzzy edge on the sprite, and I try to really supersize it up when the sprite really isn't meant to be sized this way, and it's more meant to be sized this way, that edge is going to be very pixelated. So I want to keep my sizing the same as of the wall, and instead what I'm going to do is I can select this tool up here, the third tool from the right, and it actually is my rotating axis. And I can grab a ring, one of the rings here, and I can play around with the rotation. And if you don't notice, on the right here with the transform is actually all of my position data, and in fact my rotation. And if you don't know the axis, or always remember what axis you're going to rotate on like I do, I always rotate it like this, and I see that, oh, it's the z-axis, and I know as far as a circle goes, the z-axis should be 90 degrees. Now when I click onto this, I can go back to this transform tool, move it up here, grab the corners to kind of just stretch it long like this, and I now have my top border, as you can see in my game scene. One more time, I'm going to duplicate this top one, and I'm going to pull it down here and kind of size it so that it gets evenly. Before we move on, let's talk about this real quick. So all game objects in Unity, when you select them in the inspector, at the top have this transform component. The transform component uses the X, Y, and Z coordinate plane locations in Unity, because in 3D that's what we have. We have not only the X, Y, but we also have the Z. In our case for 2D, of course, though, we're not going to actually use the Z, so Z usually stays 0. But with the rotation, we have X, Y, and Z. As far as 2D games, we ignore the Y rotation. And then we have a scale component, and that's X and Y. Now, these components usually start out as a value of 1 when you drag them out, but then as soon as we use that transform tool and grab the corner, that's what's changed. Now, I want to make note of something because our camera, when I select it, is at 0, 0, and of course -10 because it sits back a little bit, so that's fine. But I wanted to take note of 0, 0. So our camera is actually at the center. Now, for those of you that are a little bit inclined to have a specific exact measurement, we can use our transform component over here to help set that up. When you select this first wall, you'll see that my wall is actually at -6.67 in the X, and it's at 0.02 in the Y, and in this case it actually could be at 0 so that it's exactly up and down in the middle, but this -6.67. Since my camera is in the middle, I can actually make sure my wall on the other side, which is in my case wall 1, is at that exact measurement or close to it at least. So 6.66, that's really close. I mean, we're 0.007 off. If you really wanted to, you could add in a 7 so you get that exact back and forth. And same thing with the top and the bottom. Now, our position in the X should be 0 on the top, and then you'll see on my Y, I'm at 5.073 for my top wall. My wall 3 now, I'll notice that I should be 0 in the X, but my Y is off. So what I can do is 507 off a little bit and make that 5073. Now, also note that it is negative. Okay, so on the other side, just like in geometry class or in algebra class, when you talk about graphing functions and shapes and doing all these formula things, if it is across the origin or at the 0, 0 plane, the numbers are going to go negative. But the numbers are the same, it's just whether they're positive or negative. With the, we can do the same thing with the net. So let's think about the net. When I drag out the net, okay, what is the net? Well, the net needs to be at 0 in the X because it needs to be horizontally in the middle. So drag it out, put it 0 in the middle. And if you notice, I actually probably need 2 nets. So I need to drag out a second net here, kind of like this. And I'm using my game scene to kind of help with my gap and spacing, but I'm going to 0 out my X. Now, I can sit here and I could sit here and play with moving them up and down using my scroll wheel to zoom in so I can grab it, and so I can make it look spacing wise a little bit better. Use the middle mouse wheel to click and pan down as you're zoomed in to kind of get close, but it's get it visually close. And then of course resetting my X to both 0 in these so that I have my net in the middle. Next, we can grab out a paddle. Need to grab out a paddle here like this. Note that I probably want it 0 in the Y starting out so that it's right in the middle. And then take note of this X position. If I want to, I can set it maybe to exactly 5 so it's easier to know. And then drag out another paddle over here. And of course, since it's on the opposite side, I know I need it to be -5 and 0 so that they are equally across from each other. Last but not least, a ball. We need to drag out our ball sprite, and I would set that 0, 0 in the middle. Now we're almost done. Our background is blue. In the original Pong, our background was black. How do we change our background color? Well, the main camera, if you come over here in the main camera component, has all sorts of different settings. We have our transform, and then we have our component that actually makes it our camera. But right here, you should hopefully see this weird blue bar that's kind of makes you think of, hey, that was the same color as my background over here. So I wonder what this is. Well, this in fact is the background color. If I click this once, it should bring up my color picker that looks like any other color picker in other applications. But you can click and drag, and we can choose what background color we want it to be. In our case, black. Now we have our completed level. One more thing I wanted to talk about, which is the sprite's colors. If you remember in the original video when we made our sprite images, I talked about making them white because we can later on change whatever color you want the paddle or the balls or the wall to be. In my case, I'm going to change the color of both the paddles and the ball, just to give you an example. If I select on the sprite here, I can come over here into the inspector and see my sprite renderer component, which makes this game object what it is, a sprite. And you'll notice it uses the sprite paddle, which is over here, the paddle that we cut out, the mask that we cut out. And more importantly, down here, we have our color. And again, just like the background color, we can change. And I can set it to, say, red. I can come over here to my other paddle and change it to like a blue. And lastly, maybe I want my ball to stand out more, especially away from the white walls and the white net. So I'm going to select my ball. And in the color, I'm going to set it to, maybe I'll set it to green, like that. Now, one more thing I want to talk about is order in layers. Some of you might want to end up changing the color of the wall sprites. And maybe you want the top and bottom wall sprite to be a different color from the sides. And when that happens, you might start to notice that different walls get rendered on top of each other and maybe not in the way you want them to be rendered. In our case, you can see here that the net is actually right now rendered under the ball. Now, it won't always be like that because the layer or the order in the layer is all set to the same. And what I mean by that is when you select the ball and come over to the sprite renderer, you'll notice there is a setting down towards the bottom that says order in layer, and it is set to 0. Now, all of our sprites, the order in layer, are actually set to 0. When you make games, you need to think about background, foreground, middle ground, basically what you have in there and what order you want them to be rendered. Of course, our background needs to be rendered farther back, like a blue sky, or in our case, the black needs to be behind all the other sprites. How do we get that to set up? Well, the order in layers is our number that we can set. You can set any number you want. A lot of times when I make a 2D game, I'll set the background to be -10. And when that happens, I'll know that, like the ball here, goes behind the sprite of the net now because the net order is still set to 0, so the ball is now behind the net. Well, in our case, since it's simple enough, I'm going to set the order in layer for the ball to the number 1. This way, no matter what, the net is at 0 in order layer, and it is behind the ball, which is set to number 1. Again, you can use any array of numbers. Again, I set background images to -10 just so that it's way back there, and I don't have to ever worry about it again, and I set other sprite images 0, 1, 2, 3s, 5s, things like that. All right, so we have our level made. Last but not least, the thing we need to do is go File and Save Scene As, or Save Scene, since this is the first time we're saving the scene, and save it as Pong. Now, a lot of people think that they need to change the save location to the desktop because I've had you guys save to the desktop multiple times or all the time just because it's easier to see it. Do not do that. I repeat, do not do that. This scene is part of this Unity project, and it actually is getting saved in the assets folder of our game, and that's where we want it to be saved. So all you need to do is name it and hit save. And when I select the assets folder over here in the project folder, you'll see now we have the images folder and the Pong scene or level that we have created. And we are all now ready to start programming.